I'm Natalie, 25, and let me tell you about the day my entire world flipped upside down over a spilled drink and a tiny tattoo. I was carrying a tray of expensive wine to table 12 when my shoe caught on absolutely nothing, sending Bordeaux flying straight onto a Billionaire's crisp white sleeve. The man didn't even flinch, just looked at me with these calm gray eyes while I scrambled to clean the mess I'd made. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like your life was about to completely change. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. You know how some people say they've had to work for everything they have? Well, I've been working since I could basically walk. While other kids were playing with toys, I was walking the neighbor's dogs for $5 an hour. Mrs. Peterson's golden retriever, Charlie, became my first regular client when I was 9 years old. Charlie was this massive, slobbery beast who had more energy than a toddler on sugar, but I loved that dog. $5 for an hour-long walk around the neighborhood was better money than most kids my age were making from allowances they didn't have to earn. When I turned 12, I started babysitting the Johnson twins every weekend. Tommy and Sarah were these adorable little tornadoes who could destroy a living room faster than you could say, snack time. But their parents paid well, and they always made sure I had dinner and a ride home. Mrs. Johnson even started recommending me to her friends. So pretty soon I had a regular babysitting circuit going. Friday nights, Saturday afternoons, the occasional date night emergency. I became the go-to babysitter for half the neighborhood. Then there was Mrs. Henderson next door. She was this elderly woman who had this gorgeous garden but couldn't maintain it herself anymore. Every Saturday morning, you'd find me on my knees in the dirt, pulling weeds and deadheading roses for $10 an hour. She'd make me lemonade and tell me stories about when she was young and how she met her husband at a church dance in 1953. Mrs. Henderson taught me that there's dignity in any honest work, and that a job done well is its own reward. My mom, Skylar, never really explained why money was so tight. She worked at the hospital as an attendant, pulling double shifts whenever she could get them. I'd watch her drag herself through the front door at 11 at night, her scrubs wrinkled and her hair falling out of its ponytail. She'd come home exhausted, her clothes smelling like disinfectant and that particular sadness that seems to cling to hospital workers. But she never complained. Not once. She'd just heat up a frozen dinner, ask me about my day, and then fall asleep on the couch watching late-night talk shows. I never complained about the work, though. Actually, I kind of liked it. There's something satisfying about earning your own money, you know? Plus, it meant I could surprise Mom sometimes with groceries she hadn't budgeted for, or help with the electric bill when it was higher than expected. I'll never forget the look on her face the first time I handed her $60 in crumpled bills to help with rent. She cried. Actually sat down at our kitchen table and cried like I'd just given her the world. The only thing that frustrated me was how closed off Mom was about our family, specifically about my father. Every time I'd ask about him, she'd get this distant look and change the subject faster than I could blink. "It doesn't matter, Natalie," she'd say, usually while busying herself with dishes or laundry or anything that would avoid eye contact. "What matters is that we have each other." Sweet sentiment, but it left me with a pretty big question mark where half my DNA should have been. I remember being 8 years old, sitting at our tiny kitchen table while Mom made pancakes from a box mix, working up the courage to ask her if my dad was still alive. She dropped the whisk into the bowl with a clatter and stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at the batter like it held the secrets of the universe. Finally, she said, "Some doors are better left closed, sweetheart." That was it. Case closed. Discussion over. She finished making breakfast in complete silence, and I learned not to ask direct questions about my father anymore. But kids are naturally curious, right? I'd catch glimpses of something in her eyes sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking. Like when we'd pass a father and daughter at the grocery store, or when other kids at school would mention their dads. There was this flash of something, like she was remembering something she wished she could forget, or maybe something she wished she could return to. I could never tell which one it was, but it was definitely something. By the time I turned 16, I'd accepted that my father was either dead, in prison, or just a complete deadbeat who wanted nothing to do with us. Honestly, I preferred thinking he was dead. At least then it wasn't personal. At least then I could imagine he would have loved me if he'd had the chance. When I turned 17, something incredible happened. A scholarship. Full ride to State University, 50 miles away from our little town. I remember walking to the mailbox that Tuesday afternoon in April, expecting the usual collection of bills and grocery store coupons. Instead, there was this thick envelope with the university's seal stamped in gold foil. My hands were actually shaking as I tore it open right there on the sidewalk. "Congratulations," the letter began. We are pleased to offer you a full academic scholarship to State University for our business administration program. Business administration. Not my dream field. I'd always been fascinated by law and justice. But it was practical, marketable, and most importantly, completely paid for. I read that line about 15 times before it actually sank in. Full scholarship. Everything covered. I stood there holding this letter, feeling like I'd just won the lottery. Mom cried when I showed her. Actually cried happy tears, which I'd never seen before. "You did this all by yourself," she said, holding my face in her hands. "I'm so proud of you, baby. So incredibly proud." The thing was, even with the full scholarship, I'd have to live with my Aunt Carol during college, since I'd need my savings for emergencies and future plans. Carol was Mom's older sister, and she lived about 20 minutes from campus in this cute little house. She was everything Mom wasn't: loud, opinionated, and absolutely terrible at keeping secrets. Carol's house was chaos compared to our quiet little place. She had 3 cats named after different types of cheese, a collection of ceramic frogs, and opinions about everything. But she was warm and welcoming, and she genuinely seemed excited to have me around. The first few weeks of college were exhausting. Between my classes and my job at the campus bookstore, I was learning to navigate this completely foreign world of higher education. I was studying business, but my heart kept drifting toward the law students I'd see in the library, poring over case studies and constitutional law textbooks. That's what I really wanted to study, but law school required an undergraduate degree first, plus money I'd never have. It was during one of those late-night study sessions that Carol brought me hot chocolate and finally opened up about Mom's past. "Your mother was always the adventurous one," she said. "When she was 16, she just up and left for New York City, said she wanted to see the world." "New York?" Mom had never mentioned New York. "She called once in a while," Carol continued. "But when she came back 2 years later, she was different. Quiet, more serious, and pregnant with you." She paused. "I also noticed she'd changed more than just her personality. She dyed her hair from blonde to brown, and she had this tattoo on her wrist that definitely wasn't there before. Some kind of symbol inside a triangle. I'd seen that tattoo my whole life. Mom always covered it, but I'd caught glimpses over the years. Sitting there in Carol's kitchen, learning that my mother had once been some mysterious runaway who returned pregnant and changed forever, that tattoo suddenly seemed a lot more significant. College was everything I'd hoped it would be and absolutely exhausting at the same time. The business administration program was rigorous and practical, teaching me about finance, management, and economics. I excelled in my classes, maintaining a high GPA while working at the campus bookstore to help with expenses despite my scholarship covering tuition. But the whole time, I felt like I was settling for practical instead of pursuing my passion. Don't get me wrong, I was grateful for the education and the opportunities it would provide. The business courses taught me valuable skills about how organizations function, how money flows, how decisions get made. But every time I walked past the law school building on campus or heard classmates talking about their dreams of becoming lawyers, I felt this deep pang of longing. The law students looked different from the rest of us. More serious, more purposeful. I'd see them in the library at midnight, surrounded by thick textbooks with titles like Constitutional Law and Civil Procedure, completely absorbed in case studies and legal precedents. That's what I wanted to be studying. That's what made my heart race with excitement instead of resignation. During my senior year, while other business students were celebrating their upcoming graduation and their job offers at accounting firms and corporate headquarters, I was working 2 jobs and saving every penny for what I hoped would be my real future. I had this secret plan that I'd never told anyone, not even Carol or Mom. I wanted to apply to law school eventually, but I knew I'd need to work for a few years first to save up the money and gain some life experience. The math was daunting. Law school tuition, even at state schools, was expensive. Living expenses for 3 years without working full-time. Bar exam fees. The investment required was enormous, and I'd already used up my one shot at a full scholarship for my undergraduate degree. After graduation in May, I did exactly what I'd planned. I found a small studio apartment about 15 minutes from downtown. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. 600 square feet of independence with a Murphy bed that folded into the wall and a kitchen that was basically a closet with appliances. But it had good natural light and belonged entirely to me, which felt like luxury after years of shared dorm rooms and Carol's guest bedroom. I bought a reliable used Honda Civic with decent mileage and only minor cosmetic issues. The paint was faded and there was a small dent in the back bumper, but it ran well and the inspection was good. More importantly, it was paid for in cash, which meant no car payments eating into my law school savings. Job hunting was humbling. I'd graduated cum laude with a business degree, but the entry-level positions I could find either paid poorly or required experience I didn't have. The legal field seemed impossible to break into without connections or prior internships, so I took what I thought would be a temporary position as a waitress at the Grand Heritage Hotel. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and the tips were better than anything else I'd been offered. Plus, I told myself, it was just temporary. A year or two to save money, then I'd apply to law school, and finally pursue what I really wanted to do with my life. The Grand Heritage wasn't your typical restaurant. This was an exclusive hotel dining room where billionaires and celebrities came to eat in complete privacy. After years of loud, chaotic jobs, the Grand Heritage was like a spa for my nerves. The guests were polite, tipped generously, and mostly just wanted to be left alone. My manager, Catherine, was this elegant woman who'd worked there for over 20 years. She taught me that high-end service was an art form. The key, she told me, is to anticipate needs while being completely unobtrusive. The money was incredible. A single dinner shift could earn me more than I'd made in an entire weekend at previous jobs. For the first time, I was able to save serious money every month toward my law school dream. The clientele was fascinating to observe. There was this businessman who came in every Tuesday, always alone, always ordered the same meal, and never seemed to actually enjoy his food. He looked like he was in his mid-40s, wore perfectly tailored suits, and had this distant, almost melancholy air about him. Catherine told me he'd been coming for about 6 months. Some people come here for the food, she said. Others come for the silence. I understood that completely. Sometimes you just need a place where you can exist without having to explain yourself to anyone. After spending my whole life working multiple jobs and managing other people's expectations, the Grand Heritage felt like the first place I could just be good at my job without having to be anything else, which of course is exactly when everything went completely sideways. It was a Tuesday evening in October, when my life decided to throw me the curveball of the century. I was carrying a tray with a glass of the hotel's expensive Malbec to table 12, the quiet businessman who always came in on Tuesdays. Nothing unusual about that routine. I'd served him dozens of times over the past year, but apparently my shoe had other plans. I still don't know what I tripped over. The floor was clear, my shoes had good grip, and I'd walked that path hundreds of times. But somehow, my left foot caught on absolutely nothing and sent me stumbling forward. The wine glass launched into a perfect arc toward disaster. The Malbec hit his right sleeve with impressive accuracy, creating an immediate deep red stain on what was obviously an extremely expensive white dress shirt, the kind that probably cost more than I made in a week. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I started, immediately reaching for the cloth napkin. "I don't know what happened. Let me clean this up right away." Here's what surprised me. He didn't react at all. Not angry, not frustrated, not even mildly annoyed. He just looked at me with these calm gray eyes and said, "It's fine. Accidents happen. Please let me get this cleaned up," I insisted, carefully dabbing at the stain. "The hotel will pay for dry cleaning, of course." "Really? It's not a problem," he said. "It's just a shirt." That's when I saw it. As I was cleaning the wine, his cuff pulled back slightly, revealing his wrist. And there, in black ink, was a tattoo. A symbol inside a triangle. The exact same tattoo I'd seen on my mother's wrist my entire life. I froze. "My mom has exactly that same tattoo," I said, staring at the ink. The change in his expression was instant. Those calm gray eyes sharpened, focused on my face with an intensity that made me step back. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice had changed completely. Softer, almost scared. I leaned closer, studying the tattoo. It wasn't just similar to Mom's, it was identical. "No, really," I said. "Exactly the same. I've been looking at that tattoo my whole life." And that's when this perfectly composed businessman went completely pale. "What's your mother's name?" he asked quietly. "Skylar. Her name is Skylar." He closed his eyes like I'd just confirmed something devastating. When he opened them, I could see recognition mixed with disbelief. "Skylar," he repeated. "Do you know her?" I asked, my heart racing. Instead of answering, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit down. I think we need to talk." I looked around nervously. We weren't supposed to sit with guests. It was basically the first rule. But something about his urgency made me ignore protocol. "The tattoo," he said once I'd sat down, "isn't just any design. It's a family symbol. My family's symbol." "My family? I don't understand. My mom's family doesn't have money. We're not—" I gestured around the expensive dining room. "What's your last name?" "Collins." "Natalie Collins." He nodded slowly. "Your mother and I dated when we were teenagers," he said carefully. We were planning to get married. The world seemed to stop. This man had dated my mother, had planned to marry her. That's impossible, I said. Mom would have told me if she'd been engaged. His laugh was bitter. Would she? Because she disappeared one day without a word. I got a job offer in London, an incredible opportunity. When I told her about it, suggested we could go together after we married, she just vanished. The timeline was starting to make sense. Mom's trip to New York when she was 16. The tattoo. The way she'd changed. When did this happen? I asked. 26 years ago, he said. Right around the time you would have been conceived. There it was. The truth I'd wondered about my entire life. What's your name? I asked quietly. David Morrison. I'm 44 years old and I think... He paused, looking directly at me. I think I'm your father. The realization hit like a physical force. After 25 years of questions, here was my answer. Delivered by a spilled glass of wine and a matching tattoo. I need to see her, David said suddenly. I need to see Skylar. We have so much to talk about. I looked at this man, my father, and realized our family story was about to change completely. Tomorrow, I said, I'll bring her to Romano's tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. Are you sure this is the right approach? He asked. Trust me, I said. Sometimes the best conversations are the ones people can't plan for. The next evening, I picked up Mom for what she thought was just a nice dinner out. She dressed up in the navy dress I'd bought her for Christmas, and she looked beautiful, more put together than I'd seen her in months. She'd even styled her hair and put on the pearl earrings David had given her years ago, though she didn't remember that connection yet. The drive to Romano's was filled with normal conversation. Her work at the clinic, a difficult patient who'd made everyone laugh, my classes, and whether I thought I'd made the right choice in pursuing law. Normal mother-daughter conversation that made me feel progressively worse about what I was about to spring on her. But it was too late to back out now. Romano's was bustling with the dinner crowd, couples celebrating anniversaries and families enjoying evening meals together. The hostess seated us at a table by the window, and Mom spent a few minutes looking around with genuine appreciation for the warm atmosphere. When I told her I had a surprise, she immediately got that suspicious look that meant she knew I was up to something. What's going on, Natalie? You're being weird and you're fidgeting with your napkin. It's about family, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. Her expression immediately changed, walls going up the way they always did when family or the past was mentioned. She set down her wine glass and looked at me with the guarded expression I knew so well. What about family? Did something happen to Carol? No, Carol's fine. I took a deep breath. It's about your past. About the time you spent in New York. Mom's face went pale. She'd never talked about New York beyond the basic facts Carol had shared with me. Natalie, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but some things are better left alone. Not this, I said gently. Not this time. Before she could ask more questions, I saw David walking through the restaurant entrance. He looked nervous, dressed in casual clothes instead of his usual business attire, and he paused just inside the door, scanning the room until he found our table. Mom, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand, which had gone ice cold. The surprise I mentioned? It's walking through that door right now. She turned to follow my gaze, and I watched her face change as she saw David approaching our table. The progression was heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. First, confusion. Who was this man? And why was I pointing him out? Then slowly dawning recognition, her eyes widening as her brain processed what she was seeing. Then shock, her breath catching audibly as 26 years of carefully buried memories came flooding back. Natalie, she whispered, her hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. What have you done? I found him, Mom, I said softly. Or rather, he found me. And I think it's time you two talked. David had reached our table now, standing awkwardly beside the empty chair. For a moment that felt like hours. Nobody said anything. The restaurant continued its gentle buzz of conversation around us, but our little corner of the world had gone completely silent. Hello, Skylar, David said finally, his voice gentle and uncertain. Mom's free hand flew to her throat, where I could see her pulse fluttering rapidly. David, she breathed, and hearing her say his name was like watching the final piece of a puzzle click into place. What are you doing here? I think, I said, standing up from the table and gathering my purse. This is my cue to give you two some privacy. I'm going to take a walk around the block. I'll be back in about 30 minutes. Natalie, wait, Mom started, panic creeping into her voice, but I was already moving away from the table. It's okay, Mom, I said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Trust me, This conversation is 26 years overdue, and it's time. As I walked away from the table, I could feel them watching me leave, but I didn't look back. Some moments are too important to witness, too private to intrude upon, too sacred to disturb with an audience. This was their moment, their chance to finally have the conversation that might have changed all our lives if it had happened decades ago. Walking around downtown for 30 minutes while your parents have their first conversation in over 2 decades is possibly the longest half hour of anyone's life. I must have checked my watch 50 times, and every minute stretched like taffy. I found myself window shopping without seeing anything, my mind completely occupied with wondering what was happening back at Romano's. Were they talking? Crying? Arguing? Had Mom walked out? Had David? Was this the worst idea I'd ever had? Or the best? The suspense was absolutely killing me, but I forced myself to stay away for the full 30 minutes I'd promised. When I finally made it back to Romano's, I paused outside the window to assess the situation before walking back inside. What I saw made my heart soar with relief and joy. They were sitting close together, both of them leaning forward with their hands clasped on the table between them. Mom had clearly been crying. I could see the streaks of mascara under her eyes even from outside, and her hair was slightly mussed like she'd been running her hands through it. But she was smiling. Actually smiling? In a way I hadn't seen since I was little and still believed in fairy tales. David was talking animatedly, gesturing with his free hand while holding onto Mom's with the other. His face was more open and expressive than I'd ever seen it during all those Tuesday dinners at the hotel. He looked younger somehow, like being with Mom had awakened parts of himself that had been sleeping for decades. I took a deep breath and walked back into the restaurant, making enough noise with my footsteps that they'd hear me coming and have a moment to compose themselves. They both looked up as I approached, and the change in Mom's face was remarkable. She looked lighter somehow, like a weight she'd been carrying for decades had suddenly been lifted from her shoulders. "How did it go?" I asked, settling back into my chair and trying to read the emotional temperature of the table. David looked at Mom, and she nodded encouragingly. "We have a lot to catch up on," he said, his voice warm with emotion. 26 years worth. But the important thing is that we're all here now. All 3 of us. Together. All of us," Mom echoed, and her voice was thick with tears she was trying not to shed. "I'm so sorry." "Natalie. Sorry you grew up without knowing your father. Sorry I let my fear keep us apart for so long. Sorry I robbed you of having a complete family because I was too scared to face the truth. What were you afraid of?" I asked gently, genuinely curious about what could have driven her to make such a drastic decision. Mom glanced at David again, and he squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Fear that he'd reject me," she said quietly. "When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked completely. David was going to London. He had this amazing opportunity that could change his whole life, and I was just a scared 18-year-old who didn't want to ruin his future with my problems." "So you disappeared," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place with heartbreaking clarity. "I went to New York," she confirmed, unconsciously touching that familiar tattoo on her wrist. "I figured I could handle everything on my own, prove to myself and everyone else that I was strong enough to raise a baby without anyone's help. I was young and proud and absolutely terrified." David shook his head, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "If I'd known," he said, looking directly at me, "I would have come back immediately. London, the job, the money, none of it would have mattered compared to being with you and your mother. Not for 1 second would I have chosen career over family." Looking at them sitting there holding hands, seeing the way they looked at each other like no time had passed at all, I realized that maybe some love stories don't end when people think they do. Maybe sometimes they just get interrupted, waiting for the right moment to continue. David called me the next morning. "I want to do something for you," he said, "to start making up for the years I wasn't there." 3 days later, I sat in his office at Morrison Industries, a glass tower downtown that I'd walked past a million times without knowing my father worked inside. The meeting wasn't just about money, though David had certainly prepared for that conversation. It was about building a relationship and planning for a future none of us had imagined possible a week ago. "I know you're independent," he said, pulling out legal documents, "but I also know you have dreams." He'd done his homework. Somehow, probably through conversations with Mom over the past few days, he'd learned about my law school aspirations, my financial struggles, my careful planning for a future that had seemed so far away. "I've spoken with my lawyers about establishing a trust fund," he continued. "Nothing overwhelming, but enough to ensure you never have to choose between your dreams and financial security." The amount was substantial, but not ostentatious. Enough to pay for law school without loans, to live comfortably while studying, to start my adult life without the burden of debt that had shaped my childhood. There's also this, he said, sliding car keys across the desk. Your current car is reliable, but this one is safer. And I've put a down payment on a condo downtown, close to the law school. Close to here. Law school? I asked. I've had conversations with the admissions department. With your grades and background, you're an excellent candidate. There's a spot waiting for you next semester if you want it. I stared at the papers, the keys, the possibilities laid out in front of me. After years of working multiple jobs and carefully budgeting every penny, the idea of financial security felt almost unreal. I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me try to be the father you deserved, David said. I looked at this man who was offering me everything I'd ever wanted and realized that the most important thing he was offering wasn't money or education. It was family. Yes, I said. Thank you. Over the next 3 weeks, David and Mom began the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship. They were careful, deliberate, taking time to really know each other as the adults they'd become. It was beautiful to watch. Two people who'd never stopped loving each other learning to be in love again. Meanwhile, my own life was transforming in ways I'd never imagined. The paperwork for my trust fund moved through legal channels, including DNA testing to establish paternity officially, which came back exactly as we'd expected. David insisted on doing everything properly, legally, transparently. I gave my notice at the Grand Heritage, and Catherine was surprisingly understanding. I wondered when you'd move on to bigger things, she said. You were always too smart for this place. The condo David had found was perfect. A one-bedroom with huge windows overlooking the city, walking distance to the law school. Not too big, not too fancy, just right for a student who wanted to focus on her studies rather than impressing anyone with her living space. Law school orientation was everything I'd dreamed it would be. Walking into that first constitutional law class, surrounded by other students who shared my passion for justice and legal theory, I felt like I'd finally found where I belonged. But the best part was having parents who were proud of me. David came to my orientation, and both he and Mom helped me move into my new place. For the first time in my life, I had two people who were invested in my success, who asked about my classes, who celebrated my achievements. How does it feel? Mom asked one evening as we sat in my new living room, takeout containers spread across the coffee table. Surreal, I admitted, like I'm living someone else's life. It's your life, David said firmly. It's the life you always deserved to have. 3 weeks after that first dinner at Romano's, David asked to speak with Mom privately. I knew what was coming. I'd seen the way he looked at her, the way she lit up when he called, the way they'd been slowly rebuilding not just friendship, but romance. I have something to ask your mother, he told me beforehand. Something I should have asked 26 years ago. The proposal happened on a Saturday afternoon in Mom's small apartment. David had asked me to be there, which seemed unusual until I realized he wanted this to be about all of us. About family, not just romance. Skylar, he said, getting down on one knee in her tiny living room. I know we're both different people than we were at 18. I know we have more to learn about each other. But I don't want to waste any more time. He pulled out a ring box. Not ostentatious, but clearly expensive and chosen with care. Will you marry me? Mom looked at him, then at me, then back at him. We've only been dating for 3 weeks, she said. But she was smiling. We've known each other for 28 years, David replied. We just had a 26-year intermission. What do you think, Natalie? Mom asked. Is he completely crazy? Probably, I said. But it's the good kind of crazy. The kind that believes in second chances. Mom looked back at David, who was still kneeling patiently. If we do this, we do it right. Do it. Real wedding, proper planning. I want Natalie as my maid of honor. Whatever you want, David said immediately. And we take our time with the planning. 6 months at least. I want to be sure we're making this decision as the people we are now, not just the memory of who we used to be. Whatever you need. Mom held out her hand. Then yes. Yes, I'll marry you. The engagement ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting 26 years for her finger. As they kissed, I realized I was crying happy tears for the 3rd time in a month. I can't believe this is happening, I said. Neither can I, Mom laughed. But it feels right. It feels like the ending we were always supposed to have. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of wedding planning, law school, and learning how to be a family. The adjustment period was both wonderful and occasionally overwhelming. After 25 years of being just Mom and me, suddenly having a father figure involved in everyday decisions took some getting used to. I threw myself into my studies with a passion I'd never experienced before, finally pursuing the career I'd dreamed about since I was a kid, watching courtroom dramas and wondering what it would be like to argue for justice. Constitutional law became my favorite class, and I found myself staying late in the library, absorbed in cases about civil rights and legal precedent. For the first time in my academic life, studying didn't feel like work. It felt like preparation for my calling. David proved to be a wonderful father in ways both big and small. He came to my law school events, including a constitutional law debate where I argued about free speech protections. Seeing him in the audience, genuinely proud and interested in my academic achievements, filled a void I hadn't even realized existed. He helped me study for exams, and despite his business background, he was surprisingly good at helping me work through complex legal theories. But more than the big gestures, it was the small things that meant the most. He called to check how my day went. He remembered when I had important exams and sent encouraging text messages. He learned that I liked my coffee black and always had a cup ready when I visited. These tiny acts of thoughtfulness were foreign to me. I'd never had a parent who paid attention to my preferences or routines. Mom flourished during the engagement period in ways I'd never seen before. She quit her exhausting hospital job, something she'd wanted to do for years but never felt financially secure enough to risk, and took a part-time position at a medical clinic. Suddenly, she had evenings free, weekends to herself, and the kind of work-life balance that had been impossible when she was working double shifts to support us. The transformation was remarkable. The constant worry lines around her eyes softened. She started sleeping better, eating regular meals instead of grabbing whatever was convenient between shifts. She even started dating David properly, something she'd never had the chance to do when they were teenagers. They went to movies, tried new restaurants, took long walks through the park where they shared stories about their separate lives, and discovered how their core selves had remained unchanged despite the years apart. The wedding planning was joyful in a way I'd never seen Mom experience before. She'd never had the chance to dream about a wedding when she was 18 and pregnant and scared. Now, at 44, she threw herself into the details with the enthusiasm of someone finally getting to have the celebration she'd always wanted. We spent weekends looking at venues, tasting cakes, and choosing flowers. Mom insisted on keeping everything elegant but not ostentatious. She wanted beautiful, not extravagant. She chose the Grand Heritage Hotel for both the ceremony and reception, and when she told me why, I nearly cried. "This is where our story really began," she said. "Where you discovered your father and brought our family back together. It feels like the perfect place to celebrate our new beginning." The irony wasn't lost on any of us that the place where I'd worked as a waitress would now host my parents' wedding. Catherine was thrilled when she learned about the connection, and personally took charge of coordinating everything. As the wedding approached, I found myself thinking about how dramatically all our lives had changed. A year ago, Mom had been a single woman working exhausting shifts and eating frozen dinners alone. I'd been a waitress saving every penny and dreaming of law school. David had been a successful but lonely businessman, eating solitary meals and wondering what might have been. Now Mom was planning a wedding to the love of her life. I was halfway through my first semester of law school, living in a beautiful apartment, and discovering what it felt like to have two parents who were genuinely interested in my life. David had the family he'd never known he wanted, and the chance to be the father he'd never known he was. "Are you nervous?" I asked Mom the night before the wedding as we did a final dress fitting in the bridal suite. "Terrified," she admitted, but she was smiling. But the good kind of terrified. It's like getting a second chance at the life I was always supposed to have, but with the wisdom that comes from actually living through some difficult times. "We all are," I said, helping her adjust her veil. "All of us are getting a second chance at the family we were meant to be." The rehearsal dinner was small and intimate, just family and a few close friends who had become important to us over the years. David's business partners, some of Mom's co-workers from both the hospital and her new clinic job, my law school friends who'd become like siblings to me, and Aunt Carol, who spent the entire evening crying happy tears and telling anyone who'd listen about how she'd always known this day would come somehow. "I may not have known the details," she said during her impromptu speech, "but I knew Skylar had left a piece of her heart in New York all those years ago. I just never imagined it would find its way back to her like this." "Tomorrow," David said during his rehearsal dinner speech, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm not just marrying the love of my life. I'm officially becoming part of a family I should have had all along. I'm gaining not just a wife, but a daughter who brought us together through sheer determination and maybe a little divine intervention in the form of spilled wine." Looking around the table at the people who mattered most to us, I realized that sometimes the best love stories aren't the ones that happen quickly or easily. Sometimes they're the ones that take 26 years to unfold, requiring patience, forgiveness, loss, growth, and the willingness to believe that it's never too late for a happy ending. The morning of the wedding, I stood in the bridal suite helping Mom get ready. She looked absolutely radiant, not just beautiful, but peaceful in a way I'd never seen before. The years of worry and exhaustion that had lined her face seemed to have melted away, replaced by genuine joy. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," she said, adjusting her veil. "This feels too good to be real." "It's real," I assured her. "It's happening, and you deserve every bit of happiness coming your way." The ceremony was perfect, small enough to feel intimate, elegant enough to feel special. As I walked Mom down the aisle, I caught sight of David waiting at the altar. He looked nervous and happy and completely in love, and for the first time in my life, I was watching my father prepare to marry my mother. The vows they exchanged were personal and heartfelt, acknowledging both their past love and their present commitment. When David promised to never let fear or misunderstanding separate them again, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant announced, and as my parents kissed, the room erupted in applause and cheers. During the reception, David pulled me aside for a private moment. "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for finding me, for bringing us back together, for giving me the chance to be your father. Thank you for being worth finding," I replied, hugging him tightly. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found myself standing by the same window where I'd first seen David's tattoo and changed all our lives. Our Mom and David were dancing slowly to their wedding song, lost in their own world of happiness. My phone buzzed with a text from my study group, asking about our upcoming contracts exam. Such a normal, everyday message, but it filled me with gratitude for how wonderfully ordinary my life had become. I had parents who loved each other and loved me. I was pursuing my dream career without financial stress. I had a future that looked bright and full of possibilities. The transformation from struggling waitress to beloved daughter hadn't been instant or easy, but it had been real. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't about romance. They're about family, forgiveness, and the willingness to believe that broken things can be made whole again. 1 year later, I graduated from my first year of law school with honors, and both my parents were there in the audience cheering louder than anyone else. It was such a small thing, a simple academic ceremony, but it represented everything I'd ever wanted. Achievement earned through my own hard work, and family there to celebrate with me. The ceremony was held in the university's main auditorium, and as I walked across the stage to receive my certificate for completing my first year, I spotted Mom and David in the third row. Mom was crying proud tears, and David was taking pictures like it was my actual graduation from law school instead of just the end of first year. Having parents who were that invested in my success still felt surreal sometimes. That summer, while I worked as an intern at a downtown law firm, Mom and David celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a trip to Europe, the honeymoon they'd never had the chance to take when they were 18. They sent me postcards from London, where David showed her the office building where he'd worked all those years ago, and from Paris, where they acted like the newlyweds they'd never gotten to be. The postcards were hilarious. Mom wrote about how David insisted on taking pictures of everything, and how she'd learned to say "excuse me" in 5 different languages. David's postcards were more romantic, talking about how surreal it was to finally be showing Skylar the world they'd planned to explore together decades ago. While they were gone, I threw myself into my internship at Hartwell & Associates. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly research, filing, and occasionally sitting in on depositions, but I loved every minute of it. Being surrounded by lawyers who were passionate about justice, watching trials in progress, learning how the law actually worked in practice rather than just theory, was better than any vacation I could have taken. The senior partner, Margaret Chen, took me under her wing after I helped her research a complicated civil rights case. She was this tiny woman with a fierce intellect and zero patience for laziness or sloppy work. "You have good instincts," she told me during my final week of the summer program. "Keep studying hard, maintain that GPA, and there'll be a position here for you after you graduate. We need lawyers who understand that the law isn't just theory. It's a tool for making people's lives better." When Mom and David returned from Europe in August, tanned and happy and somehow even more in love than when they'd left, we had our first official family vacation together. We went to a lake house that David rented for a long weekend, and it was wonderfully normal. Barbecuing hamburgers, playing board games, telling stories about our separate childhoods. It was during that weekend that David finally told me the full story of what had happened between him and Mom all those years ago. They'd been high school sweethearts, completely devoted to each other, making plans for a future that seemed guaranteed. When the London opportunity came up, a chance to join an investment firm's international program, David had seen it as the perfect way to start their life together. "I was so excited to tell her," he said as we sat on the dock watching the sunset. "I thought she'd be thrilled. We could get married, move to London together, start our adult life in this amazing city. I had it all planned out." But when he'd told Skylar about the opportunity, she'd gone quiet. She'd said she needed time to think about it. 3 days later, he'd gone to her house and found it empty. She and her family had left town without a word. He'd tried calling, tried reaching out through mutual friends, but it was like she'd vanished completely. "I went to London alone," David continued. "I told myself it was better this way, that if she didn't want the life we'd planned, I shouldn't waste time trying to convince her. But I never stopped wondering what had happened. What had changed her mind so suddenly? Now we all knew the answer. Mom had been pregnant and terrified, convinced that telling David would ruin his chance at the career opportunity of a lifetime. She'd been 18 and scared, and absolutely certain that the best thing she could do for everyone was disappear. The worst part," Mom said, joining us on the dock, "was that I spent years wondering if I'd made the right choice. Wondering if David would have resented me and the baby for holding him back. Wondering if he would have chosen his career over us anyway." "Never," David said firmly. "Not for 1 second would I have chosen anything over you and Natalie." As the summer ended and I prepared for my second year of law school, our family settled into a comfortable routine. Sunday dinners at David's house, where we'd talk about my classes, their work, current events, and whatever random topics came up. Normal family conversation that I'd dreamed about having my entire life. The house itself was becoming more of a home as Mom gradually moved her things in and made it theirs instead of just his. She'd added family photos to the mantel, plants to the windows, and the kind of comfortable touches that made a house feel lived in, rather than just expensive. By Christmas of that year, the transformation was complete. We had family traditions now. Mom's famous chocolate chip cookies, David's elaborate breakfast on Christmas morning, and the way we all insisted on opening one present each on Christmas Eve. Normal, everyday happiness that I'd dreamed about my entire life. "What are you thinking about?" Mom asked one evening as we sat around the fireplace, catching me staring into the flames. "Just all of this," I said, gesturing around the room decorated with photos of all three of us together. "How different everything is from 2 years ago." "How much better?" "Better?" David asked, looking up from the legal brief he was helping me review. "So much better," I said. "Complete." And it was. After 25 years of questions and partial answers, our family was finally whole. Not because we'd found some fairy tale ending, but because we'd found each other and chosen to build something real and lasting and true. We'd taken a story that started with fear and separation and rewritten it into something beautiful. Looking back, I realized that some of the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. A spilled glass of wine, a glimpse of a tattoo, the courage to speak up when something seems familiar, the willingness to believe that broken things can be made whole again. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of family, forgiveness, and second chances. Because sometimes the most unexpected accidents lead to the most wonderful destinations, and sometimes the family you're meant to have is waiting for you in the most unlikely places.